Good evening. My name is Lisa Barksdale, and I'm a Senior Vice President at Bank of America. I also serve as a member on the Women's Leadership Series Steering Committee. It is Bank of America's distinct honor to be the title sponsor of Asia Society's flagship Women's Leadership Series. Bank of America is committed to gender equality and has been recognized as a global leader in supporting the development and success of women in the workplace. At Bank of America, 50% of our workforce, 45% of our global management team, 40% of managers, and 35% of our board members are women. At Bank of America, we are guided by a common purpose to help make financial lives better through the power of every connection. We deliver on this purpose through our commitment to responsible growth, which includes a focus on environmental, social, and governance leadership, or ESG. Our commitment to ESG has helped us respond to the rapid disruption caused first by the coronavirus and then by the very real consequences of systemic racism. Building on our extensive philanthropic support and leadership in CDFID lending and green bonds, we've been able to pivot quickly with a $1 billion commitment over 4 years to advance racial equality and economic opportunity. This includes $100 million in virus-related grants to communities, $250 million to support CDFI, $50 million in direct equity investments to minority depository institutions, including Unity National Bank here in Houston. At the same time, we have issued a $1 billion social bond to aid coronavirus relief efforts, as well as a $2 billion bond designed to advance racial equality, economic opportunity, and environmental sustainability. We look forward to this evening's discussion because we believe that we should not let this situation quiet down. As a company and as a society, we have to redouble our efforts to make progress on economic and social issues. Asia Society Texas Center has been at the forefront of raising awareness for women, and the goal of the Women's Leadership Series is to inspire, educate, and empower women. It is a celebration of diverse women who are making a significant impact in society and is designed to serve as a vehicle to generate important conversations. We thank you for tuning in this evening for the launch program of Year 6 of the Women's Leadership Series on the topic of building Black and Asian solidarity, women leading across race, history, and culture. Amidst the grief, pain, discord, and the numerous crises that our fellow citizens around the country have been facing over the past few months, we are hopeful that this program brings a message of hope for the future and helps strengthen our human connections with one another. We'd like to express our utmost gratitude to our title sponsor of the series, Bank of America, and the presenting sponsors, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, Ann and Albert Chai, and Nancy Pollitt-Gani. Our thanks to the many generous lead sponsors, additional supporters, and special friends advancing the mission of this series through their support and sponsorship. Special thanks to the Women's Leadership Series Chair, Ann Chow, and the steering committee members who serve as a guide and inspiration for the series. I now have the honor of introducing our very inspirational group of speakers for this evening. Dr. Ruth Simmons serves as president of Prairie View A&M University. She was president of Brown University from 2001 to 2012. She also served as the president of Smith College, the largest women's college in the U.S., where she launched a number of important initiatives, including an engineering program, the first in American women's college. Helen Zia is an activist, author, and journalist. She is the author of Asian American Dreams. Her recent book is Last Boat Out of Shanghai, the epic story of the Chinese who fled Mao's revolution. She has also been featured in the Academy Award-nominated documentary, Who Killed Vincent Chen? Helen has been outspoken on issues such as human rights, women's rights, countering hate violence, and homophobia. Moderating the program is Juju Chang, co-anchor of ABC News Nightline. She also reports for Good Morning America and 2020. Juju has covered major breaking news and global issues for decades for ABC News. Her work here has been recognized with numerous awards, including multiple Emmys, Gracies, a DuPont, a Murrow, and Peabody Awards. We hope you enjoy the program this evening, and now I turn it over to Juju.
Lisa, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be part of this auspicious Zoom gathering. I hope you're going to settle in for what I think is going to be such a treat. This is a lovely conversation between two women who I've long admired. Helen Zia up close because I've been friends and admiring her work for the better part of 30 years. And Ruth Simmons, I have friends who served on the board of Brown University, and they use words like dazzling and brilliant. And when you left Brown, they were all heartbroken. And now that you're at a historically Black college and university, the HBCUs, I'm sure, are truly grateful to have you. I just wanted to kick it off because I'm sure a huge percentage of the people in our audience watched the vice presidential debate last night closely. And so much of what we talk about when we talk about building allies is representation, and how important that is, and what it was like watching that for both of you, with Kamala Harris being obviously a historic first African-American woman on a major party ticket, first Asian American, South Asian woman in the same capacity. She was literally the embodiment of that intersectionality that we're going to discuss tonight. Ruth, what were your takeaways? What struck you watching the debate? And share some of your thoughts, if you will.
Well, Juju, thank you very much. And good evening, Helen. I could not help but relate to her, frankly, for a host of reasons, not just because of the representation, but it became evident once the debate started that she was receiving all of the kind of treatment that I have seen Asians and Africans and African Americans and gays and others endure over a long period of time, because insulting her, talking over her, dismissing her as not being intelligent, all of those things brought back such memories. And so seeing her stand up to that by saying, I will not be lectured. I love that line. And refuting what the vice president was saying. I felt in a way that she was standing up for women. She was standing up for all of us by being strong, being her own person, and not backing down. So I found it taxing watching that, but I also found it exhilarating because I was very proud of what she was doing.
Fascinating. Helen, thoughts?
Well, first, just let me say what an honor it is to be here as well, to be sharing this with you, Juju, and to be with Dr. Simmons, who I have admired for a very, very long time. So I would just reiterate what Ruth just said. I also watched it. I found it, in addition to all of the put downs and the treatment that Senator Harris experienced, I have to say, I just felt like cheering every time she just came right back with it and was not fazed, used her time to give real information. I guess I should also say she's my senator. You know, I'm in her home district. I'm living at where she was, the town she was born. And so, you know, I was part of a hometown crowd, and seeing how proud she is as a Black woman and as an Asian woman and as a woman being there, unapologetic for any of that. Not that she should be, but she, you know, was repeatedly put in a position, you know, then and throughout this whole campaign. And she just stands so strong and proud. It was wonderful to see, and I can very much imagine her not only as vice president, but as president of these United States someday.
Well, it was really
isn't it telling that today she was called a monster by the president? I mean, really, the fact that often for those who have led, they really are perceived as monsters because they are disrupting the order of things that people, certain people have become accustomed to. And so the courage that she needs in order to step into this role and to take those slurs and those attacks is something we should all remember for our colleagues and our sisters who endure that. We have to wrap our arms around them and support them so that they can get through it, because it must be horrendous.
This is clearly right. This is clearly a discussion about women's leadership, and I think women who are leaders understand that there is a certain type of man who is threatened by a strong woman. But let's move on to the subject at hand, which is this idea of Black and Asian solidarity in American communities. You know, as marginalized communities, Asian Americans and African Americans have a lot of commonality. And historically, there have been a lot of alliances, but there have also been a lot of episodes of deep distrust and even conflict. Helen, let me start with you. How do we acknowledge the episodes of collaboration where we work together, but also be truthful about the conflicts in order to move forward as allies together?
Well, I think in your question, there are the elements of the answer about being truthful, to acknowledge, and for most of us who don't get the history of the people of the United States, the people's history of this country in school, or even if they go to college there, and certainly not in from Hollywood movies or cartoons or TV shows, they really are deprived of the good, bad, and the ugly of the people of coming together and making this country, and certainly acknowledging that this country was built on the blood of Black people who were brought here as slaves, as well as the genocide of Indigenous people. And Asian Americans, our history in coming to this country is really, which also began really, we can go back to the 1500s, but in terms of the United States in the 1800s, was partly to replace or compete with Black labor. And so if we look at our juxtapositioning in terms of the history of this country, you know, Asian Americans have never been fully accepted as full Americans in this country. We can go on about where we stand today, but certainly in up until recent history, we've been viewed as the enemy, as never loyal to this country, as unassimilable, unable to become Americans. And some of that still persists today. That has never gone away. But it's in terms of the racial, you know, hierarchy, if we want to call it that way, Asian Americans have come in as an intervener in terms of Black people. And so, so part of that history in where we fit into the systemic racism in this country is to have to understand that and to acknowledge it. And so, you know, if we want to talk about dismantling systemic racism, we also have to understand where Asian Americans fit into that as well. You know, whether it's the model minority, the good minority, which is how it's viewed today. You know, so all of that is there, and that's part of acknowledging and understanding. But the missing history is the fact that when Asian Americans, you know, first appear in American law, it's with a federal law to prohibit Asian Americans from China and then later Japan, Philippines, Korea, India, every part of Asia really, to ever becoming American citizens. And actually Asians were the first, quote, illegal immigrants because in American law, it was embedded that we could not become citizens. But when that law was coming up in Congress, it was Black newspapers of those times, W.E.B. Du Bois and other Black leaders who said the Chinese Exclusion Act is not a good thing for America. It's not a good thing for other minorities of that time. So they spoke up against it. And then Asian Americans over time have actually played a role that was supportive in terms of Black Americans and other people of color in this country too. Brown versus Board of Ed, we know was the landmark case against segregation, and began the desegregation of public schools. But that was based on a Supreme Court decision around segregation of Chinese laundries in San Francisco. And so there is an interrelationship that's existed. And there are many, many Asian Americans and Asian American organizations that have also fought against racism and fought for racial equality, and were part of supporting, even in our small numbers, the civil rights movement. But those things are what I call MIH, missing in history. So we have to begin by recognizing, acknowledging, unlearning the poison that has been fed to us, but also trying to understand the real history. So I guess I would say it's complicated, but it's not unknowable. All of this information is out there. And if we can open our minds to it, we can see that solidarity has existed in the past and exists today. And we need that solidarity to move forward.
I think that's so well put. And it's clearly a racial reckoning and an awakening that's happening across the country now. Ruth, I want your thoughts on the same subject, but also expand for us this idea of solidarity and what that means and what, perhaps some meaningful actions on that score might be.
Well, surely you couldn't expect me to do any better than that. I mean, that was brilliant and complete, let's face it. I will say that I'm often, as an educator, trying to bring clarity to issues by reducing them to a simple format where people can absorb it and retain it. And as I think about this, I think about the ill that segregation has produced in this country. I think about, as Helen suggested, the suppression of the truth in order to privilege certain points of view and certain groups. As citizens, we need to be aware of the need for us to be very active participants in a process of deconstructing all of that. And that's what I try to encourage my students to do. We have to look for commonalities. We have to be cognizant of the notion of how we are exposed to information. And we have to be participants in getting to the truth. So I love the fact that the country is going through a reckoning with regard to all the lies that we've told over time. Because inevitably, when we misrepresent people, misrepresent their histories, there will be a reckoning. And so one of the ways of avoiding that inevitably is for us to connect to the necessity of finding commonalities in an ongoing way, not segregating ourselves, looking actively for those commonalities, and nurturing them, frankly. And so that's what we try to do. That's what I encourage my students to do.
You touched on sort of the feelings of being the first in so many respects when you were answering the question about Kamala. And I wonder, Ruth, given that this is a women's leadership series, what advice you would have? Not only were you the first female president of Brown, the first African-American Ivy League, you were also named by Time Magazine as the best college president in like 2002. And the Brown student body gave you an 80% approval rating. So you weren't just a first, you were, a barrier breaker in so many ways. But give us a sense of what difficulties you faced throughout your career and what advice you would give to others who face similar sort of friction along the way.
Well, I mean, each of us has our personal stories. Mine is having a mother who had an 8th grade education and who worked as a maid, who had the wisdom to instill in me an understanding of how to appreciate myself and how to deal with the hostility that surrounded us as children in the pre-civil rights and civil rights era. And because she had the wisdom to do that, I guess I have always felt that for people who are put in the position of having to be the first, the most important thing for them to remember is that they don't have to change. That the values and the virtues that they bring from their entire history really are the things that help to teach people who have not been exposed to people like them. And so I found it fairly easy because when I was approached to become president of Brown, I went forthrightly to the search committee and said, I think you have made a mistake because you cannot know the person I am if you want me to be president. Because I will not change in order to be your image of a leader. I can only be the person that I am. And only after they assured me that they were prepared for that was I prepared to do it. So my first and most important advice, I would say, to people who are put in that position is to be the person that you are in its full complement. The ethnicity, the sexuality, the cares that you have, the concerns that you have, the people who stand behind you. You bring all of that with you and you make people accept who you are. And if you are true to that, you can be very happy in doing that. And I certainly have been very happy in the various roles that I've fulfilled because I didn't compromise.
Helen, during the pandemic, I did a story about Breonna Taylor, and the founder of Say Her Name, Kimberly Crenshaw, coined the term intersectionality some 20, 25 years ago. And I believe that you're the embodiment of the intersectionality of all of the activism that you have had throughout your life, whether it's for human rights, civil rights, women's rights, AAPI rights, LGBTQ rights. Give us a sense of how that intersectionality has played out throughout your career, and how does that help you to find bridges to other communities, to find commonality and to work together?
Well, thank you for that question. I don't know that I embody this any more than others, because I will say that we as human beings we're all complex. We all fit into, it's not that we have so many buckets we fit into. We all are, many, many different things. But I wish I had learned the lessons that Ruth talks about of being yourself and bringing your whole self in when I was young. And so being an Asian American kid, an Asian American girl growing up in the 50s before the civil rights movement, or as the civil rights movement was unfolding, I viewed myself as not only that I was an alien, but I was an alien from Mars who would land in a shop, a mall. People would stare at my family as though, where did you land from? And then they would say things to us like, what are you? As though human wasn't a good enough answer. And so I grew up not knowing exactly who I was supposed to be. And if as the question of race unfolded in America, it was, well, I was told, well, you're not Black, you're not white, what are you? And for me at the time, there was no Asian American movement. In fact, the words Asian American had not yet come into being. So as I, came of age, then there were all these incredible movements that helped inform me that, as I watched the news every night and saw the civil rights movement unfolding, Rosa Parks and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and they talked about equality based on who you are, not on the color of your skin. That spoke to me too. And so I began to really understand a little bit that I already knew that I wasn't white, but having to have the idea that I could speak up myself as an Asian child. And the women's movement was unfolding and women were standing up saying, we should not be treated as second class because of our gender. And the gay liberation movement was beginning, and also the war in Vietnam that showed people who look like me as enemies every day. So I threw myself into all of those movements. And, I think for a lot of people, you end up, well, how many ways can you slice up 24 hours in a day? I want to go to the women's meeting. I want to go to the Third World Students Movement meeting, which is what we called it in my day. I want to go, protest against this war in Asia. And so I saw pieces of myself in different movements. And I have to say that, when I was working, say, in the Asian American movement, there would be my fellow students, my friends and my buddies, my comrades in arms who would say to me, we're going to fight race first. After the revolution, we'll deal with sexism. And you would sit there and you'd think, why? It's a revolution. Shouldn't we be dealing with all of this? And then I would go to a women's meeting and feel like they know nothing about race or anything about what else is going on in the world. And, it would just be replicated wherever I was. And it's very sad and tiring. And you go to one meeting and think, I have to represent gender here. And I go to another one and have to talk about race here or sexual orientation. And I began to see that for me, it would just be important for my sanity and my wholeness to be able to bring my whole self in to a meeting or to anywhere I was, and to be seen in my whole personhood, my full humanity. And understanding that about myself made me realize that's what everybody wants. We want to be seen as full human beings, treated as full human beings with all the rights that every other human being gets, and treated with full human dignity. And so as I began to realize that conflict within myself, I also saw that really that is the fight for all people. And so anyway, it took me a while to get there. It took me a lot of times of wondering, are they treating me this way because of my race, my gender, because they think I'm a lesbian, because of whatever? And to just go to Ruth's lesson about being who I am. And this is who I am, like it or not. I'm here in front of you, and you have to see me. And so I think that was part of my learning process. And, each different race, ethnicity, the way racism and sexism get layered on and keep us divided is that there are the stereotypes or ways that we're all, treated, that Black women are loud, Asian women are silent. And so if you're an Asian woman who wants to have a voice, you almost have to scream. And that goes very much against, might go against one's own nature. But to speak at a normal tone as an Asian woman, it's almost definitely going to be stomped on. So those are things I feel like were learnings for me. But it's all about just, we have to bring our whole selves in.
That's such a great answer. Ruth, I'm curious, some of the rallying cries on the streets of protests is that representation matters. And you have walked the halls of power in so many capacities, not just in the ivory towers of academia, but also, in the boardrooms at Goldman Sachs, and other, institutions of power. And I'm wondering how the impact you think you have seen in the representation that not just you have, but others may have in sort of breaking through either the glass ceiling or the bamboo ceiling or whichever ceiling seems to be holding people back?
I think we should remember that representation is not merely at a symbolic level. And I remember my days at Goldman Sachs, when the Black employees of Goldman Sachs came to me to talk about the concerns they had in the company. The idea of having a voice at the table and understanding that that voice would represent not just race, but the kinds of concerns that they had about race, for example, and about the lack of opportunities to advance. So I think representation is pretty darn important, frankly. I remember that I had a wonderful childhood in a deeply segregated environment where Blacks were suppressed because I had a large and loving family. But although my family was large and loving, I was a girl. And there were certain things that I was brought up to think I could never aspire to do because I had, a certain place in life and I should not seek to go beyond that. Well,
I was astounded, Ruth, to learn that you were the 12th child, the daughter
yes.
of sharecroppers. That's incredible.
And 7 brothers.
Oh my goodness.
But it was not until I got to Wellesley College on a year's study abroad program that I saw Margaret Clapp. My goodness, she was president of a college. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, are you telling me that a woman can run an institution like Wellesley? So that stuck in my mind. And that's what happens to children. It happens to all of us, that we see people who are doing things that we dare not think we can do. And it makes all the difference in the world. So representation is extremely important. It's not the end of the story, though. It's not nearly enough because representation can devolve into tokenism. And that's when it's very harmful, frankly. But having people present who are a part of us and who speak to us in powerful ways because of who they are, that's all important when you're trying to find your way in the world.
I think there's so many pitfalls, whether it's tokenism or implicit bias, meaning, that you're stereotyped in a certain way. I know, Helen, Asian Americans are often labeled, as you said, the good minority, the model minority. And yet we look out at the pandemic and Asian Americans have a higher unemployment rate and a disproportionate impact on COVID. Why is invisibility or silence a problem for Asian Americans?
Well, getting back to the notion of bringing our whole selves into the picture, and the question that Ruth was just talking about, representation. If you're not there and you're invisible, the fact that people have no idea of who you really are as a human being, what happens is that's not just empty void in there. It gets filled with what I consider to be toxins, poisons of characterizing any group that is other than what is represented in what I call the master narrative. The overwhelming story of the default people who are the real Americans, and the real Americans generally are white, and the ones who run the real America are white men, and nothing against them, but America is made of so many more people, and benefits with a lot of different ideas, and that's what really makes America great. But so if you're missing from the picture, people have their minds filled with other images and what I consider to be cartoon images of Asian Americans. So we could either be the Fu Manchu, the Ming the Conqueror, who's coming from outer space really to destroy America, or when I was coming up, all of the different war movies that were either you were the Japanese enemy, you were the Korean enemy, you were the Vietnamese enemy, or you were the Chinese enemy. And to most non-Asians, you know, we all look alike. They say that you all look alike. And so, so we see that get played out. We see that get played out today, you know, where, you know, more than 3,000 incidents of anti-Asian hate, COVID hate have been reported. And we know that's an undercount because these are people who actually report. And the majority of them are not Chinese, number one, but anybody who looks Chinese is a target today. That's happened over and over again at different points of history. And so when people's minds are filled with this poison because we're invisible, the only antidote to that is to be able to present who and force media, you know, television, movies, and raise our voices, make news so that we can be seen in our full diversity, because all Asians are really different from each other. And there's not one way to describe any people. But unfortunately, there really is only one, you know, one coin, two sides to that coin, the enemy or the quote good minority. And the good minority is only good because they're quiet and they say nothing and they never complain, no matter how much is piled on them or how badly they're treated, they never complain. So either way, it's a losing proposition for Asian Americans, and that's what's in there. So to me, as a writer and as an activist, the only way we can defeat this whole notion of any people being seen just as a cartoon character, as a one-dimensional thing, is to create openings so that we can have human beings seen in their full humanity. And that's what we have to fight, I think, as Asian Americans. That invisibility is still very much there. I can't tell you how many reports I see about what's happening in the country where Asians are never mentioned in there, as though the 20 million plus people just are non-existent, except when it's useful to bring us into the picture, to pit us against, you know, Black and brown people, for example, with these affirmative action lawsuits that are going on that are not brought by Asian Americans initially. You know, these are brought by conservative white groups who then throw Asian Americans in there. And unfortunately, Asian Americans are also not immune from the poison. You know, there's a lot of studies about how people who are colonized, for example, you know, take on the view of themselves that the colonizer imposes on them. So unfortunately, there are many Asian Americans who have kind of swallowed this poison too. So we also have to detoxify ourselves. And the best way to do that is to have more Juju Changs on TV for people to see doing the kind of hard news that you do. If I had seen that when I was a kid, I would have thought, oh, yeah, I could be a journalist too one day, you know, but that's what we need.
Right. Trust me, I've had my moment with Connie Chung with great gratitude to her. Yeah. But I will just share a moment today, ladies, where I was stuck in a traffic jam and I was wearing my face mask. I had just dropped off my son and somebody opened their window. We were stuck and presented me with a racial slur that I shall not repeat. And I will tell you, I was not silent. I may or may not have let off a few expletives, but you know, this is very real and this is very present, and it is our day to day. I just want to flag that in about 5 minutes, I'm going to officially open the Q&A section, but I've been quietly reading along the edges of my chat page, and there's a question that literally is identical to one that I was planning to ask. So I will give credit to Tabish who is asking, what are the biggest obstacles, do you think, standing in the way of Black and Asian women, and what would be the steps needed to remove those obstacles? Ruth.
Well, one obstacle is full awareness of the impediments to full equality. I can't tell you how many times I have to lecture women who come into my office and who are seeking employment or other opportunities, who downplay their needs, and who insist that they don't want any special treatment, that they want to just be treated, just to have an opportunity, and so forth. And pretty soon, I'm lecturing them about what it's actually like in the real world, because every day when men come into my office, they ask for the moon. And the difference between what women have access to and what men have access to, for example, is what they believe they're entitled to. And so I think the most important thing is for people to be aware of what they are entitled to and to seek that, because every time a woman accepts less than she should have, it makes it very difficult for the women who come behind her. And so that's inordinately important to me, that we're held back because people who are able to make those corrections don't do it, and so on. So I remember when I was at Princeton, I was responsible for faculty salaries, and I brought in an econometrician periodically to look at salaries and to tell me whether or not there were issues between women and men on the faculty. And I was told that, well, yes, there's a big difference, because when women start, they ask for less, and that carries through for their entire career. And so being knowledgeable about what you're worth and how much you matter, that's inordinately important.
That's such a great answer. Thank you so much, Ruth. Helen, I wanted you to talk a little bit about the case of Vincent Chin. It was a hate crime. It was a murder in the 80s. You did so much to bring it to light, and it helped inform, activism for so long for you and for the entire AAPI community. What connections can you draw to what is unfolding on the streets now in the wake of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, so many others?
Well,
my
fortunately,
dog in the room. Stand by.
As you point out, there is a connection today, and we're talking about what I think for especially for young people might seem like ancient history, an event that happened in 1982. So we're talking, almost 40 years ago. But during that time, America was in a terrible economic crisis. It started in the 1970s. There was an oil crisis. There was a recession. But in the Midwest, where I was at that point, I was in Detroit. And the entire auto industry collapsed because people couldn't afford to drive those big American dinosaurs that only got 7 or 8 or 9 miles a gallon. And gas had shot up so much. And factories closed. I was one of those factory workers in Detroit. And I was out of work. People who had worked all their lives for these very high-paying jobs, actually, lost everything. They lost their homes, they lost cars, they lost summer homes, they lost their children's future, and they had no idea whether they would ever work again. And so in that frustration, that economic crisis lasted a number of years, actually almost the entire decade of the 1980s. And what Congress, the C-suites in the corporations, even the trade unions agreed on was that there had to be an enemy to blame. And that enemy was Japan. It was Japan's fault that they made fuel efficient cars and people would buy them instead of American cars. And here's the thing. So did Volkswagen in Germany. But racism is so much more effective when people look different. And so suddenly anybody who looked Japanese was not only a target, but even people who drove Japanese-made cars would get shot at on the freeways. It was that intense and that potentially violent. It was a powder keg. And so in that climate, eventually somebody was killed. A Chinese-American man named Vincent Chin was beaten to death by 2 white auto workers who were then given probation in a city like Detroit, because the judge said these are not the kind of men you send to jail in a city like Detroit. And so it was a case that was just filled with all sorts of racial racism, racial implications. And the Asian American community back then, which was very separate, didn't see itself connected, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Vietnamese, Indians, that we were all separate from each other. We came together because we were all targets. What happened to Vincent Chin could have happened to anyone. But so the connection to today is that we're in an economic crisis. We're in nobody can actually predict how long this is going to last. It's a global economic crisis. There's a pandemic. There are people who are losing loved ones. There are people who are, how many millions out of work today, and potentially very long term. And Asians are being blamed for it. Once again, there is a pandemic of a virus, but there's a pandemic of racism, and people are being pitted against each other. We're coming out of it. We're in a period of great division. So it's very similar in that way. And I guess I would say to Asian Americans, as well as other people of color and people who often get targeted for what we look like or who we are, we're in this climate. It's a dangerous climate, and we have to take care and be aware of that. But we also have to organize. We have to reach out. One of the things that happened during the Vincent Chin case was that communities came together. We had a very small Asian American community. We reached out to the African American, the Black community, Black churches, political leaders, a Jewish community, really people from every walk of life came forward to say this was an injustice of what happened to Vincent Chin. And we really had a multiracial, multicultural, multi-class coalition, really, across the country, and made a difference there that affected everybody. And by everybody, I want to say one of the things that came out of the Vincent Chin case and this effort was not only about Asian Americans, but the whole idea that victims have a right to speak at sentencing so that people don't just get probation for beating somebody to death. Those were victim impact statements and part of a movement that the Me Too movement has taken very effectively. There was also the hate crimes protection bills that came out of that whole movement. So these are things, when people come together, I guess I just want to make the point that when people come together, great change can happen that affects everybody for the benefit of everybody. And so for where we are today, it may seem like ancient history, but it's not that long ago. We have come together as Black, Asian solidarity, as well as every, religious denomination you can think of coming together, people from all walks of life at a time that really wasn't that long ago. And there are many lessons. It didn't just happen. It wasn't kumbaya, which I think people sometimes think today, young people especially, like, well, you came together then. What could bring us together today? What brought us together was a lot of hard work, a lot of conversation, a lot of meeting with each other, asking hard questions. We were asked, the Asian American organizers then were asked by the very well-developed Black community in Detroit then, where did you Asian Americans come from talking about civil rights? Are you just here to ride on our coattails of the hard work we did? And we had to answer that and to talk a little bit about where we came from, who we are, that some of us did speak up in those days, but have been in the civil rights movement, but have been made invisible. And that there are a lot of new immigrant Asian Americans and refugees who we have to teach these things. Those of us who are Asian have a responsibility to teach newer Asian immigrants, about America's history, about systemic racism, about solidarity and what that takes. And so, so those are things we learned then, and we did them, and good things came out of that for everyone. And so
this is
we can
your
do that
answer
today.
is so eloquent, Helen. I'm just going to ask Ruth to build on it. I'm seeing a ton of questions come in, so I want to sort of build on this question of solidarity and what these communities can do to work. There's a question from Saul that came in earlier. What can larger communities do to build and support for Black, Asian, and other minority communities? There's a question from Jeff just now. Ruth mentioned the legacy of segregation. How can Black and AAPI communities come together in a practical, structural, systemic way? When Helen says it takes hard work, what did the bones structure of that look like?
Well, first of all, as I always say, that we want some of the hardest things to occur sometimes without much planning and without much work. And we sit back and sort of wait for things to happen. Even good-meaning people, well-meaning people do that. But we know that doesn't happen, that conscientious effort to align yourself with groups, doing the kind of work that you believe in, is the best way to be involved in the struggle, and to be persistent. I often say, if you're not committed, don't drop in as a tourist. This is lifetime work. You get involved, and it's not formulaic. What you may choose to do, the groups you may align yourself with might be well different from what I might do, but it's everybody undertaking this work that will make the change. Everybody demonstrating a commitment to it is incredibly important. And I think, keep in mind how segregated we are as a country. I mean, honestly, I never dreamt that the country would be as segregated as it is today, given the fact that we learned many decades ago how absolutely disastrous that was. So at a basic level, I always say people should look at their own lives and see whether or not they're living segregated lives. And most of us are. Our social gatherings, our enclaves, and so forth are all with people who are just like us. Breaking that habit is very important, and encouraging others to break that habit. So the more we see these variegated groups together, working together, we are modeling behavior that has to occur on a grand scale for this country to move beyond where it is. So don't try to start with something grandiose, start with something you can do. Finding a group that's doing good work to bring people together, to find those commonalities and get involved with it. That's the best way to start.
The fact that you're all tuned in right now to the Asian Society of Texas says volumes about everyone who's listening in tonight. Also, I give a plug to Nightline tonight. Steve Osensami, one of our correspondents at ABC News, is doing a story about barbecues in the hometown of the Ku Klux Klan. The idea of breaking bread with someone you don't know and why that's so important. Just completely dovetailing, Ruth, with what you said. I'm going to ask you both two questions that are fabulous, and I want to ask them as a pair, and we have about 7 minutes left, which means we have 6 to chat. Stephanie wants to know, you are such inspirational women. Who inspires you? Is there a pivotal or memorable moment you could share? And Rogine wants to know, what keeps you both hopeful and continue going in such a positive way? Who wants to start?
Well, there are so many people who've inspired me. Honestly, I like to remind people, whoever they are, that one way or the other, each of us is inspiring somebody by what we do that is edifying or positive. And so that's important for everybody to remember. The power we have by our actions by our caring and our involvement to inspire other people. But I will say that I had a high school teacher who had the biggest impact on my choices in life. My mother died when I was 15, and I was just going into my junior year and high school, and I came across this teacher who took an interest in me and became a bit of a surrogate mother for me. And she convinced me that I could actually go to college. And I thought that was preposterous, really. I mean, how could I possibly go to college? And so she did more than suggest that I could go. She went to a university and convinced them to give me a scholarship. And she not only did that, but when I got to college, being completely impoverished and having nothing, in fact, she went into her closet and took clothes for me to pack to go off to college, and then sent money to me when I was in college. There were many times when I wanted to drop out of college because it wasn't for me. I was kind of an ugly duckling. I didn't fit in. I wasn't very social, but every time I thought about giving up, I thought about the care that she had for me.
Ruth is so inspiring. She's just frozen for a moment. I'm sure she'll come back. Helen, we're less than 5 minutes away from closing. Do you want to take a crack at that set of questions?
Well, I have to say, over the years, there are many, many people who have inspired me. Many women many teachers I've had, women teachers who believed in me in the way that Ruth was saying. Her teachers, but not quite the way her teacher really took her in. That's really quite a story. As a journalist, I have to say, and as a writer, I've interviewed so many people who, in their own way, no matter how big or small, have tried to make a difference in the world and overcome just incredible barriers. And those always inspire me. I want to get to your question about what makes me hopeful. And no, I have to say, no matter how I wake up some of these days, these years, just thinking, oh my God, I just can't believe this. What's next? Locusts. And sometimes I think locusts would be better than what happens. But I have to say that a little bit of history will teach us that we've been through, even in my lifetime, we have been through terrible times. People look at the civil rights movement days with nostalgia or sentimentality and just think, oh, people came together. But you know what? Those were terrible times. People were killed. Communities were burned down. People died for the rights that we have today. And so where we are today, I have to say, in the whole scheme of things, we've been before, and we've actually been through much worse. So knowing that gives me the strength to get up in the morning and think we can do better. The other thing is just knowing that, really history is on our side. The entire demographics of the United States are changing rapidly. People know that. That's why some people want to make America white again. And it's not going back. That genie has long left the bottle, and states like Texas, California, there's already a majority of people of color. And if you put in women, people of color, people of conscience, we are already in the majority of this country, and we really can move things, however big or small, whatever we do, if we do it together, we can make those changes and create the country that really we aspire to. And, people talk about going back to normal. Normal was not good. Normal was what got us here. We have to make better. And if we, join hands and find people, as Ruth was saying, building a commonality, finding those people and having a vision of a different world together where there is solidarity, where people actually imagine that we could have solidarity, we'll get there. history is taking us there. So we have a choice of being involved and making it happen, or to stand back and just accepting, whatever that comes our way. And I think all of us would rather think that we could get to the better place. And that's I think, that's what gives me hope every day.
Well, Helen, you've just given all of us a little bit of hope and inspiration and insights. Thank you so much for your perspective and all of your great wisdom. Just to close it off for Helen, the happy ending for her is that she ended up getting her PhD from Harvard in Romance languages and went on to become a trailblazing, pioneering academic and global leader. Helen, I don't know how many Princeton educated auto workers there were out there, but you are the most inspiring one I've ever met. Thank you for all your work and all of your writing and your activism. I want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us tonight. Asia Society Texas Center, I should point out, offers 150 different public programs every year, featuring arts, culture, education, business policy, current events, you name it. And many of the programs, we should point out, are free and made possible thanks to the strong financial support of members and of corporate friends and civilian friends. And we really, truly hope that you'll consider making a donation tonight to support. And you can do it really simply by texting Asia Society TX and then say add 243-721. I'm going to write that down. 243-725 rather. And I'm going to put it up. This is super high tech. Can you see it? Is it backward? I can't tell. Asia Society TX 243-725 to donate. Or you could log on to the website and do that. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you got as much out of it as I do, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.